A dense forest just steps away from a magnificent waterfall, a paradise on earth, but at the same time, a perfect place to dispose of a body. Who was this woman whose mutilated body was discovered by loggers in December 2016? Who killed her? Why? The mystery of the unknown woman of Les Franois captivated France for months. But thanks to incredible determination and a stroke of luck, investigators were able to first identify the victim and then uncover a killer so unlikely that many were more willing to believe his story, worthy of a detective novel, than accept that he could be a brutal criminal. Les Franois is a small commune in the Jura department in eastern France. This truly verdant area attracts tourists with its stunning lakes and waterfalls. But on December 15, 2016, it was not tourists who were destined to make a chilling discovery, but hard-working loggers. While working, one of them descended into a steep ravine and noticed something pink beneath the leaves. The man bent down and brushed the leaves aside. At first, he thought he had found a piglet that had escaped from a nearby farm, but to his horror, he then recognized human toes. The loggers quickly notified the police about the body they had found. Since Les Franois has virtually no police presence, investigators from Besançon took over the case. The location where the body was discovered was 50 meters from the road in an especially steep ravine. The body lay under a tree, completely hidden by leaves and branches. Had it not been for the loggers, who were short on firewood, the body might have remained undiscovered for a long time. The body belonged to a young woman between the ages of 15 and 25. The victim lay on her back, naked, her nudity revealing numerous stab wounds. However, the face had suffered the most damage. It was horribly disfigured, with a dislocated jaw and broken teeth. Identification through facial features was impossible. The only distinctive feature of the victim was her red hair. There were no tattoos, piercings, or surgical scars. Aside from a woven bracelet on her wrist, there was nothing. No clue to help the police establish her identity. At the scene, there was almost no blood, which indicated that the body had been brought to the forest after death and that the murder had taken place elsewhere. While the detectives in Besançon were dealing with an unidentified body, the Missing Persons Department was actively searching for a missing girl from the same city. Narumi Kurosaki, a student, had arrived in France from Japan in August 2016 to study French. She had disappeared a few days earlier after having dinner with her ex-boyfriend. Narumi lived in a university dormitory, and on the night of her disappearance, one of her neighbors heard a chilling scream that abruptly stopped. Since Besançon was only an hour's drive from Les Franois, the body found in the forest could have belonged to Narumi. However, the face was so badly disfigured that only DNA testing could confirm this theory. But the DNA samples did not match. The body in the forest was not Narumi's. It couldn't have been that straightforward. Nevertheless, given the victim's age, investigators still believe she might have been a student. And since the body was discovered in December, they hoped the holiday season might provide a lead. Unfortunately, when detectives reviewed the missing persons list in early January, they found no records of any girl who had gone missing in mid-December. The autopsy report revealed that the victim from the forest in Les Franois had suffered 26 stab wounds. The wounds matched a small pocket knife with a short blade. Surprisingly, none of the stab wounds were immediately life-threatening. The victim died from facial trauma caused by a blow from a heavy object, combined with significant blood loss. Determining the exact time of death was challenging, but it was estimated that she had died 5 days before her body was discovered. Before her death, the girl had engaged in sexual intercourse. However, the medical examiner doubted that it was non-consensual. It appeared to have been voluntary. The semen found allowed investigators to extract male DNA. Additionally, a bloodstain was discovered on the victim's foot that did not belong to her. It was likely that the killer had injured himself while stabbing her. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to the same man who had sexual contact with the victim before her death. Meanwhile, officers combed the forest, employing canine units and helicopters. They understood that any early oversights could never be fully rectified, so they approached their task with the utmost diligence. The steep slope presented a significant challenge. As they descended, officers and forensic experts slipped multiple times, instinctively grabbing at trees and bushes to steady themselves. This led them to a realization. If navigating the terrain was difficult for them, it must have been equally challenging for the killer who carried the victim's body. They swabbed all nearby bushes and trees and found DNA matching the semen and blood on the victim's foot. This confirmed that the person who killed her and dumped her body in the ravine was the same individual. Identifying the perpetrator's DNA was a significant breakthrough, but having a name to match the sample would be even better. The DNA was checked against the databases of European countries and Interpol, but no matches were found. Since detectives had neither the victim's identity nor the perpetrators, they found themselves at a dead end. The Forensic Science Research Institute of the French National Gendarmerie contacted the detectives, offering to perform a facial reconstruction of the victim. There were two possible approaches: either send the victim's head directly to the institute or perform a CT scan. Investigators decided against further disturbing the victim's remains. Fortunately, they had the necessary equipment for a computed tomography scan. The institute conducted the facial reconstruction and added red hair, which the victim likely had. The resulting image was distributed through regional and national media outlets. Over 100 calls were received, but none led to any breakthroughs. Meanwhile, media interest in the enigmatic case remained high, and the murder came to be known in the press as the case of the unknown woman from Les Franois. In February, the investigative team was contacted by colleagues from another precinct. They reported a potential suspect, a lumberjack who lived 20 kilometers from Les Franois. 3 years earlier, this bachelor had invited 3 young Bulgarian women to stay with him as housekeepers. However, the women soon went to the police, as the man's intentions were far from cooking and cleaning. He had hidden their passports and attempted to force them into providing intimate services for him and other men. Despite their complaint, no legal action was taken, so the man remained free. Given his profession, he was familiar with all the forests in the region. Investigators wondered, what if the murdered woman was one of those he had invited but had refused to provide the services he demanded? What if she wasn't French but a foreigner? This theory was taken seriously by the team. For an extended period, they monitored the lumberjack, keeping his home under surveillance. Wiretaps on his phone revealed insights into his life. It turned out that he was in frequent contact with a young Bulgarian woman. However, their conversations suggested that this time the man himself was the victim of a romance scam, as the woman repeatedly asked him for money. Eventually, investigators brought the man in for questioning and collected a DNA sample. The sample did not match the DNA found on the victim's body. While the man had complicated relationships with Bulgarian women, he was not the killer. Unbeknownst to the detectives, their hypothesis that the victim was not French had brought them one step closer to uncovering her identity. Given the challenging situation surrounding the identification of both the victim and the perpetrator, detectives sought fresh ideas to move the investigation forward, attempting unconventional methods beyond the scope of traditional investigations. For instance, they knew that in the Jura department, lynx populations were monitored using camera traps. The detectives decided to employ these camera traps in hopes of uncovering something useful. Unfortunately, even these unconventional approaches yielded no results. Months passed, and they remained empty-handed. There were no leads to follow, neither concerning the killer nor the victim, a situation that is exceedingly rare in criminal investigations. This lack of progress deeply frustrated the investigators, leaving them feeling as though they were the only ones who cared about solving the murder of this young woman. Surely someone should have been searching for her, either in France or another country, but no such efforts materialized. A breakthrough in the case occurred, as often happens, when no one expected it anymore. Over a casual coffee conversation between a French gendarme and a Swiss colleague. What do two police officers talk about? Naturally, their work. In January 2017, one of the detectives working on the case of the unknown woman from Les Franois traveled to Switzerland for professional reasons. During a coffee break, he shared details about the body found in the forest near the waterfall. The Swiss officer promised to keep the information in mind if they came across an unsolved case of a missing woman. In March 2017, the Swiss colleague unexpectedly reached out to the French detective with new information. He mentioned that the Swiss authorities were investigating a prostitution network operating illegally in Lausanne. One of the women involved had gone missing. Her name was Mihaela Miloiu. But that wasn't all the Swiss detective had uncovered. On December 2, 2016, a woman walking her dog in the commune of Sullens, 15 kilometers north of Lausanne, found an ID card on the road next to a large bloodstain about 2 meters long and 1 meter wide. A little further along, she also noticed a condom and lubricant. The woman took a photo of the bloodstain and took the ID to the police. The document was issued in the name of Mihaela Miloiu. Unfortunately, the Swiss police took no action to investigate this case. It was a missed opportunity, as had they pursued the matter back then, the French police would not have wasted 6 months trying to identify the unknown woman from Les Franois. Now that the police had become interested in Mihaela's identity, they contacted the witness, and the woman showed them the spot where she had found the ID and blood. However, there was an obvious problem. 6 months had passed, during which the road had been exposed to various weather conditions: rain, wind, snow, and ice. Nevertheless, the police decided to take a risk and extract DNA from the concrete. This was a rare procedure, but thanks to the porous nature of the cement, which absorbs blood, it was possible. Forensic specialists used a perforator to remove several fragments of the concrete and examine them. They were incredibly fortunate. They managed to find female DNA. The result was sent to the French colleagues in the form of a sequence of letters and numbers, which the detective quickly compared with the DNA of the unknown woman from Les Franois. The samples matched. To rule out any possibility of error, the investigators asked their Romanian colleagues to take DNA samples from Mihaila's parents, and those too matched the blood on the road and the woman found in the forest. The unknown woman was no longer unknown. Her name was Mihaela Miloiu. Mihaela was born in Romania into a family of modest means. She, her parents, and her older brother lived in a village 200 kilometers from Bucharest at the foot of the Carpathian Mountains. Despite their difficult financial situation, her parents wanted to provide their daughter with a better future than they had. They sent Mihaela to school in the city of Câmpulon. At first, everything was going great. The girl was studying well and showing good progress. However, unfortunately, this very school was a hunting ground for a certain Dafenel Bocanu. The young man was slightly older than Mihaela, but he had a lot of experience in seducing classmates and older girls. 15-year-old Mihaela fell in love with Dafenel and soon packed her things and moved in with him, despite her mother's protests and pleas. Dafenel took her to restaurants, to the hairdresser for manicures, and bought her some gifts. Nothing extraordinary, but for Mihaela, who had previously lived very modestly, this was a whole new side of life. The poor girl didn't realize that Dafenel had long perfected his approach with girls aged 15, 16. He played the role of a charming prince, drawing schoolgirls to him and then trapping them. After some time, sometimes a year or two, they were offered to take the path of the world's oldest profession. They weren't forced, but promised better financial security. When Mihaela's parents found out what Dafenel was forcing their daughter to do, they were horrified. Her mother tried to bring Mihaela back home and even went to the school, but Mihaela simply dropped out. Things got worse. Once the girls reached adulthood, they were offered the opportunity to go west, where they could earn much more money. So in October 2016, Mihaela hid from her parents that she was flying to Lausanne, Switzerland. Attracted by the promise of a better life, she joined the prostitution network run by Dafenel's cousin, Lucien Beauchenu. This was the classic path for a sex worker. In Lausanne, the authorities are relatively tolerant towards sex workers, and there are so-called salons where the girls can expect some protection. However, Mihaela didn't work in a salon. She ended up on the streets under the control of clients who, for various reasons, couldn't visit the salons, and who could be the most dangerous for the girls. Upon learning where her daughter was working, Mihaela's mother went to the police, but they ignored her. The woman could do nothing more. Mihaela's work lasted only a short time. She arrived in Lausanne just a month and a half before her death. Once the police confirmed that the body was indeed Mihaela's, her parents were allowed to take her home and bury her. After the first breakthrough, the pace of the investigation only accelerated. The police were able to determine the exact time of Mihaela's death, thanks to the phone tapping that had been carried out by the Swiss police for a long time. Mihaela died much earlier than they had initially thought, on the night of November 29, 30, when her phone stopped working. That evening at 11 p.m., Mihaela was in Lausanne working when she received a call from Lucien Beauchenu, who told her that she had worked enough and could come for dinner. Mihaela replied that she would work a bit longer. The next call Mihaela made was at 0:50 a.m. when she called the emergency services, but the call was interrupted. At that moment, she was in Lausanne on the outskirts of the city. Then her phone moved to Solens, where a woman walking her dog had found a patch of blood and an ID. Finally, at 2 a.m., someone turned off Mihaela's phone on the border between Switzerland and France. Now that the victim's identity and time of death were established, the focus could shift to finding the murderer. Who was he? A pimp? A client? The police had a clue of blood on Mihaela's foot. The detectives believed the killer had cut himself. Therefore, they sent out requests to hospitals in the region and received a list of people who could be of interest. Specifically, they were looking for knife cuts. That's when they learned that on November 30th, 2016, at 6:50 a.m., a man with a cut on the index finger of his right hand came into the emergency room of the Pontarlier Hospital, located 50 kilometers southeast of Besançon. He told the doctor that he had hit a deer while driving home. The deer was still alive, so the man used a pocket knife to put it out of its misery. However, his hand slipped and he cut himself. The man received 1 or 2 stitches on his finger. This clumsy motorist was named Alexandre Verdure. Alexandre, 30 years old, lives not far from the location where the body was found, with his girlfriend and their young son. The couple is planning to have a second child. As for his work, he is a security officer in Lausanne. Additionally, he is a reserve police officer. He has also worked as an ambulance driver and a volunteer firefighter. Overall, Alexandre didn't seem to fit the profile of a criminal. On the contrary, it was clear that he loved helping people. However, investigators were unsettled by the examination of his phone. On the night of November 29th, 30, his phone was turned off from 1:57 a.m. to 4 a.m. During this time, his girlfriend tried to call him 17 times. Clearly, she was puzzled by his phone being turned off. After all, he had never turned off his phone that year except for that night. The timeline suggested that Alexandre turned off his phone shortly before the murder and turned it back on in the hospital in Pontarlier. These were circumstantial pieces of evidence, but the police still decided to arrest Alexandre. A DNA sample was immediately taken from him. During the interrogation, the man denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Mihaela, hadn't killed her, and had no connection to the case. Alexandre's parents were convinced that it was a mistake and that their son would be released any minute. All of Alexandre's friends and acquaintances rallied around him. No one for a second believed that he could have committed the murder. However, the result of the DNA comparison came back. It matched. Alexandre's DNA was found on the intimate parts of the woman's body, under her nails, on her foot, and on branches of trees and bushes in the forest where the body was discovered. Alexandre was charged with the murder of Mihaela. Soon after the charges were brought against him, Alexandre wrote a letter to the investigating judge, presenting a new version of events, which differed from what he had stated during his arrest. In the letter, he explained that on November 29, 2016, he finished work at 11:30 p.m. and drove home. On the outskirts of Lausanne, as he was about to join the highway leading to the French border, he saw a man attacking a woman about 50 meters ahead of him. The man was beating the woman and dragging her, seemingly intending to abduct her. Alexandre rushed to help. Upon seeing him, the man ran away. The woman got into Alexandre's car and told him that she was a street worker, a night butterfly. She offered to thank him for his help. Alexandre hesitated but agreed. They found a dimly lit stretch of road in Soulens, the spot where 3 days later, a woman walking her dog would find blood and the woman's ID. After Mihaela thanked Alexandre and they were getting dressed, a black car arrived. Two men got out. It seemed that they had been watching them. Alexandre believed they were pimps. One of the men was armed. Threatening Alexandre with a gun, they searched his bag and found his pocket knife. Using Alexandre's knife, they killed Mihaela. They then told him that either he would dispose of the body or his girlfriend, parents, and child would be in danger, as they had seen his ID, his police credentials, and his home address. After that, the men left. Mihaela lay on the ground. She was dead. Alexandre saw his own knife in her neck. He cut himself while removing the knife. The man put Mihaela's body in the trunk and crossed the border. He decided that, as a police officer, he was obligated to report the crime. However, in the rearview mirror, he noticed the black car of the killers following him. He realized that once he disposed of the body, they would kill him too. So on a turn toward the juror department, he broke free from them. In the woods, he undressed the girl because, as he claimed, the bushes were snagging on her clothes, and it was hindering him from descending into the ravine with the body. In the ravine, he covered her nakedness with leaves and branches. Out of modesty, of course. Alexandre concluded his statement, explaining that he had not killed Mihaela. He just wanted to protect his girlfriend, parents, and child. He believed that if he had spoken at any point, the criminals would have found him, and he couldn't take that risk. He simply had no choice. Alexandre's new version seemed more like the product of a vivid imagination, a movie plot rather than real life. However, since he did not fit the profile of a brutal killer, investigators took his claims seriously and checked every word of his story. At first glance, the version about vengeful pimps punishing a rebellious prostitute seemed worthy of attention. It was revealed that 3 days before the murder, Mihaela had told her mother that she wanted to return to her parents in Romania. Moreover, the head of the Beauchenu clan had a reputation for being a very violent man. There were known instances when girls were brutally beaten, their jaws broken, if they didn't earn enough money or if a client had cheated them. However, accusing the pimps in his letter, Alexandre did not know that all calls made by the clan members had long been wiretapped and recorded by Swiss police. Therefore, the officers knew for sure that the only phone in Soulens, the location of the murder, was Mihaela's. The pimps' phones were located at least 7 kilometers away from the crime scene. As for Dafino Boșanu, the young man who had seduced Mihaela, he was in Romania and had been summoned to court as a defendant. The other members of the group had been calling each other on the day of the murder and in the following days, actively discussing Mihaela's absence. Initially, they had assumed that the girl had decided to take some time off. The head of the Boșanu clan, Lucian, was worried about her absence. He said it was crucial to find Mihaela because she brought in thousands of euros every day, and taking a vacation was out of the question. However, after a few days, they realized that something had happened to her and began actively searching for her. Police work results showed that there was no other suspect besides Alexandra. Once the police ruled out the last client of the girl and the pimps, it became clear that only Alexandra could be guilty. However, the police and the investigating judge still conducted a reconstruction of the crime, starting with the supposed attack on Mihaela, which Alexandra claimed to have intervened in. His story failed to withstand scrutiny from the very beginning. From his car, driving on the highway, he could not have seen the attack on the girl because it happened too far away from him. Even with the headlights on, it was too dark. The behavior of the pimps was also illogical. Why would the killers search the witness's bag for a possible murder weapon and then kill Mihaela with a small pocket knife, stabbing her 26 times? Why would they leave the police witness alive, even if he was a reservist? Investigators had never heard of a case where a police officer had been left alive after witnessing a murder. Finally, even if Alexandra was afraid to go to the police, he could have hidden some evidence in case officers came after him. But it was he who had the idea to undress the girl completely and dispose of the murder weapon. Alexandra explained this by claiming that he simply made a mistake. However, detectives were sure that Alexandra destroyed the evidence because he was the murderer. The trial took place in December 2020 in Besançon. The prosecutor demanded a 30-year prison sentence. Alexandra stood by his version of events. Many of his acquaintances, colleagues, and relatives came to support him, stating that he wouldn't hurt a fly. However, his girlfriend, who took the witness stand, admitted that recently he had shown more aggression, even rudeness. Conflicts had escalated to the point where she had refused intimacy with him. As a result, the man had begun seeking the services of prostitutes. Experts also testified in court, having conducted a forensic psychological evaluation of the defendant. The portrait of Alexandra they painted was far from flattering. They unanimously stated that he had a strong desire to appear as a hero, a savior, and that he exhibited a grandiose sense of self-importance. The slightest hint of mockery or humiliation provoked aggression. This, they suggested, might explain the murder. He could have told Mihaela something about himself, perhaps boasting about his job or his police reservist badge, which she might have mocked. Or the intimate encounter may not have gone as he had hoped. Without his confession, we would never know. But most likely, something triggered his rage. The experts also agreed that Alexandra was very dangerous and that there was a high risk of recidivism. He was found guilty. The prosecutor insisted on a 30-year sentence, but the court sentenced him to 20 years in prison. Mihaela's family was not present at the trial. They simply did not have the means to attend. They had to borrow money to bring their daughter's body home and bury her. However, they believed it was right that the killer was convicted and would serve his punishment. On the other hand, Alexandra's family disagreed with the verdict. He appealed the sentence, and his parents hired a private investigator who tried to point to alternative suspects, Mihaela's pimps. They claimed that the girl had wanted to return to Romania and was punished for it. The family sought to prove that the police had not thoroughly examined all the evidence, and thus the court's verdict was unfair. The appellate court hearing took place in September 2021. Alexandra's family came well prepared. In addition to the findings of the private investigator, they invited an activist from a Romanian movement supporting sex workers who was convinced that Mihaela's murder was a signature of criminal gangs. She argued that this was their modus operandi. However, despite all the efforts made by Alexandra's family, they were unable to secure his release. Moreover, the appellate court increased the sentence from 20 to 30 years in prison, which had originally been requested by the prosecutor. The attempt to challenge the verdict only resulted in an additional 10 years of incarceration. Alexandre Verdure still maintains his innocence, and his lawyer is exploring the possibility of a case review, but at the moment there is no new evidence to cast doubt on his guilt. As for justice in Romania, the authorities successfully arrested and punished members of the Boșanu clan for human trafficking. Lucian and Daphne were sentenced to 12 and 9 years in prison, respectively. Of the 8 members of the clan, only one did not face punishment, as he was a minor at the time of the crimes.